truly believe it's time that we rethink our position on GM crops, not only because it's going to be an international trade issue because of globalization, but also because it might benefit our farmers to stay competitive and also to keep on feeding Europe.
All our consumers in Europe go abroad to the United States and many other countries and happily consume GM products day in daily, and no one thinks twice about it. So that there's a reality check in that Europe is out of step with the rest of the world.
The fact of the matter is that we're somebody coined the phrase agricultural museum. Europe's becoming an agricultural museum, a food museum. It's true. We are 10-15 years behind the rest of the world, or large parts of the rest of the world, in terms of what we cultivate, in terms of what we eat, in terms of what technologies we use, and that's a fact. The world is moving on. We're not.
The one thing that people haven't really got to grips with yet is the idea that even food is at risk. We've been so comfortable with the idea that we always have food and food's relatively cheap. It isn't fully understood yet by the general public, and it isn't propagated by the Commission, that our food supply over the next 20 to 30 years will be so heavily competed for that food itself is at risk. It is clear that there has got to be public engagement because of the excessive damage that was done by what might be called an anti-biotech lobby or an anti-science lobby 10 or 15 years ago. Now, a lot of the stuff was based on complete slurs, words like frankenfoods and so on, which don't have any scientific content at all.
My exposure to the debate, I guess, was back in the 90s when the GM technology first was being introduced to the United Kingdom, and it was the exact same time as BSE was going on. And the general public had lost faith in science and the advice of scientists about what was safe and what was not. And I think the whole GM technology got wrapped up into that whole debate about what is safe, what's not, and has suffered from it ever since.
The interesting thing is 15 years on, we can now look and see that experiment has been done. And it's very clear that the benefits have greatly outweighed any of the risks that were talked about 15 years ago. I think we can categorically state that there are no incremental toxicological or health risks associated with GM crops. Over 1 trillion meals have been served, and nobody has complained of even as much as a hiccup.
I believe they're at a slight disadvantage, but as the second and third generation GM crops are developed, and especially if they do develop a nitrogen-fixing gene for some of the crops, especially the white crops, once that becomes a reality, then if European farmers are not allowed to use that type of new crop, then we are going to be left way behind.
What worries us is that we are still sort of teetering on the brink, sitting on the fence, and one enormous consequence has hit Europe, and most scientists in this area recognize it, and those enormous consequences are the reduction of jobs.
You just think, how on earth can the environmentalists not understand that it's much better growing a crop that's resistant to it, where you never have to spray it, rather than spraying it 14 times during a season?
It's about growing more with less. Less inputs, more outputs, the same amount of land. We already do that with the first generation, because for example, on some of the corn, you use less pesticides, you use less tractor use, so therefore less diesel, less CO2, sometimes less water. Sometimes more targeted use of fertilizers, etc., etc. So already we're reducing with the first generation the inputs, and the farmers know that. That's why they're growing at such a massive level.
We can absolutely rack up a series of very important positives, notably drastic reductions in the use of pesticides, which even the European public would say they would like to see. 100 million pounds of active ingredient per annum less now used in the United States since the introduction of GM crops there.
Second generation does many of the same things, but has, I think, the distinguishing factor that it has or many of these products have kind of consumer benefits. I'll give you three examples. One of them is drought-tolerant corn, which is grown in the United States this year for the first time. It's had fantastic success in probably the worst drought since the 30s. And this basically, these are corn products, maize products, which can tolerate not having enough water for a longer period of time. That's obviously not just for the United States, but for Africa, but also for Southern Europe, a fantastic product.
In the UK, that there has been a substantial change in public opinion. There's been several surveys done, including the British Science Association, which made it very clear, and it surprised us, that the general public have begun to see that there's all these positive benefits elsewhere in the world, and they're asking the question, well, why are we not receiving those benefits yet?
I hope that all the stakeholders who are convinced of the benefits of GM crops are going to push in the same direction. It doesn't make any sense to pass the blame to each other. I think it's really important that both we as members of parliament, but also the Commission, regulators, EFSA, keep the science-based policy making alive and push the technology forward. I think that today we already see that there are huge benefits in the rest of the world by those farmers who are using GM crops, so why not do it in Europe?
It is indeed time to think again on GM. The debate is ended. It's time now to move forward and start thinking about how we can adopt technology in such a way that is beneficial to all of us, not just farmers, but also to consumers, to everybody involved.